Welcome to the Dreadful Dialogue, the podcast where we chat about an array of things related to all things horror. I'm your host, Alyse, and today I have a guest that is going to be chatting with me today about Mr. Harrigan's Phone. We're not just going to be talking about the movie or the novella, we're going to be talking about both. Our guest is a long friend of mine. We've been friends since high school. You'll probably hear us refer to each other as roomie because we were college roommates, and that's our nickname for each other. She's a big Stephen King fan, so in addition to talking about Mr. Harrigan's Phone, I'm sure we're going to be chatting about Stephen King as well. So let me welcome to the podcast my roomie Celeste.
Yeah, hey, Alyse, thanks a lot. Roomie, definitely, I know you more as Roomie than Alyse. It actually felt kind of weird to call you that. I'm now 2,000 miles away from you, so that's awesome, but kind of sad at the same time. But we still get to talk and hang out, and our families are super close. But I'm super excited to talk about Stephen King, as he's one of my favorite authors, which is interesting. He is my favorite author, which is interesting because I'm not the biggest horror fan, I will say.
Yeah, that's for sure. Ruby is not my roomie's not a horror fan, which is why I thought it was good to have her on the podcast, because I was like, wait a minute, you're like this big Stephen King fan, but you're a big scaredy cat. So why is that you think you can read? And we even chatted about some of the stuff that you read. You haven't read just his like wholesome stuff or his non-spooky stuff. I mean, you've read some of his true horror stuff. How are you able to read stuff, horror related, yet you're not a fan of like watching movies that are horror?
Well, I think how I became a scaredy cat is definitely my roomie's fault. One day she showed up with the new version at the time of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So we watched it with my sister. Everything was great. I had never had any experiences bad with horror or anything like that. And that night I had the most horrible dream I've ever had. And you see it in every horror movie. It's the dream where you dream that his face is three-dimensional and like right in front of you. And it woke me out of a sleep, which has barely happened unless I have one of those dreams where I'm like falling off a cliff on my bike or something like that. And I realized after that, once I watched a couple of things here and there, that horror movies made me have these horrible dreams like that. So I would dream about them. So I kind of got myself away from it a little bit. However, Stephen King just remained constant. I can read any book 2 a.m. I can pick up it at 2 a.m. and read it, but I can watch it at 2 a.m. I can watch anything at 2 a.m. if it's Stephen King. And I think it's because I've been such a fan probably since I was 9, 10 years old when I first started. I mean, I picked up Carrie when I was probably 10 years old, and then I watched the movie the next year, and I've just I think it's just this constant thing in my life that I'm okay with, that sits well with me, and maybe that I identify with and I understand.
Yeah, that's so crazy, because for me, like when I actually get more like scared from stuff that I read or I hear a scary story, I think because like my mind comes up with its own visuals for it, versus like when I watch a movie, I'm like, oh, this is Hollywood, it's fake. And I always tell everybody like, oh, watching horror movies, it's like therapy, it's cathartic. Like it's how you deal with like the real monsters that are out there. So kudos to you. And I also gotta bug you, but I think I totally forgot that I showed you that movie. I do remember though going to go see Amityville Horror. I think it was the 2000s version which I think it was before Ryan Reynolds was even popular, and that one even scared me. So I think I might have scared you with that one too.
Oh yeah, I definitely remember identifying with that little horror Amityville. So.
Yeah, we were both scared. I think we weren't living together anymore. You're like, Roomie, you're staying over, right? And I was like, yeah, for sure, Roomie.
I was so mad at that little horror. I was because there's like this realistic entity to that movie, right? It's based on a true story, and of course, if you go to research and I think back then we didn't even have, I couldn't just Google it. So that made it even more relevant to my own imagination. I had to think for myself. I had to grasp this concept that this could really, really be true, versus, and again, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is also based on real events, and it, yeah, I know it's very, very vague, right?
Vaguely connected, but yeah.
It's like when we see real events, we know it's bullshit, but I really have to grasp onto that concept when I watch something like that.
Yeah, so that's why I think it was good though that we went on Mr. Harrigan's Phone, because Some people might argue Mr. Harrigan's Phone isn't necessarily horror, but I mean, it is kind of a ghost story. It's got a bit of supernatural to it. And the great thing about the horror genre is what scares one person might not scare the other. I don't think the movie has like these jump scares or monsters, but the concept of it, which I know we're going to get into more as we chat, the concept of what happens is actually pretty scary, and what Stephen King is writing about and kind of predicting is happening. I think that was like, to me, was horrifying.
Oh yeah, definitely. One of the main concepts of his predictions from the time of year that this was made to now. I mean, a lot of people have definitely used this book to call Stephen King at 70 years old. The new Notre Dame, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
And I have definitely heard him call that after this book. There's a couple other books that were written around the same time, and he does go back and they tell him like, well, there's all these things in 2021 that you didn't even, mention. And he says, well, I wrote it in 2019. It was published in 2021. So
Yeah.
he goes, so here's now a book in 2023 that I published that is all about 2021. It's quite interesting when you think about it like that. Like, okay, what time did he, but this is different because he wrote this in a time frame that was before his predictions, obviously. So for the next 4 years, we kind of saw a lot of things in this book unravel for America in general,
Yeah. And so just a little heads up to everybody. We haven't gotten too far into the movie or the book, but just a spoiler alert. Why are you listening to this if you don't want it spoiled? But hey, a spoiler if you not watched Mr. Harrigan's Phone, which you could catch on Netflix, or if you haven't read the book, or the novella, the short story, it's in If It Bleeds, along with a couple of other of his short stories. So if you haven't checked those out, pick another episode to listen to. Yeah, for sure.
Will be so interesting that there's no way they'll want to be spoiled all day long.
For sure. So since we've seen both, do you think that this was a good adaptation of the movie was a good adaptation of the book?
Yeah. So originally I had watched the movie and I was immediately pissed off because I was like, how do I not know about this book? Where is this book at? So I watched it and I thought it was really interesting because, as you mentioned, it is a wholesome style of movie, and that's why I was really pissed off. I was like, what is this is a book and a movie that it does, you're right, has horrific implications, right? And so I immediately, went and I got the book from the library, and I just got into Audibles, but I really wanted to sit down and read the book. But to answer your question, I think it was a pretty good adaptation. I thought that they actually was a good supportive piece to the book. I think there was a lot, obviously, as usual. But, again, with such a short story, it's easy to kind of change it up just a tad when it comes to Stephen King, just a tiny bit. And I do think they went into like more of the wholesome adaptation than the book. I think the book is a little bit more dark, not much, but it is, as far as like the mental capacity of Craig and Mr. Harrigan. I do think that the book is a little deeper. Of course, you're getting all the internal thoughts of all of the characters that you're not really getting. But I did think that the movie did a good job of showcasing that.
Yeah, I think it lent to, and I think, like you said, it was good that it was a short story, so it made it easy to adapt. I mean, I've never found anything where like a movie 100% lives up to the book, but it was a good adaptation. And it definitely didn't cover as much of the dark stuff. Like you said, they definitely kept it a little more wholesome. I think they aged the main character, Craig, a little bit. I think like
Correct.
He's more in middle school, or he's starting to go into middle school. And then I think in the movie, he's more into high school.
Correct.
The first guy that dies in the book, he dies in a much more different manner.
Yes.
More horrific manner.
A little darker. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I think I don't even know the proper term for it, where he hung himself and, had fun with himself and died in that way. Whereas in the movie, it's just, he was drunk and he was climbing out of his window and fell.
Yeah.
So they did kind of, I think they did that probably because it was on Netflix and they're probably trying to get that audience of, not having to have a necessarily full on like rated R rating.
Right, and they have so many different ratings now. I'm sure they had a little bit of trouble of fitting this one in because, again, it is very different. And I also like to put in you mentioning who Craig was. I mean, he's also from other Stephen King movie, right? I think that, immediately the audience makes that connection. And also it's very interesting because it just in stars in each movie could be the same, but also Stephen King is known to make connections in his books. And it's really weird that he does that. For instance, I'll read a book from the 1980s and I'll read a book that's new and I'll remember. He's very, very good at that. I don't know how he does it. I don't know how anybody does that really. And I'm just, oh, that was that book. And he's very subtle about it. It's not like he writes in his book from the book that I wrote in 1980. You know, it's very subtle for him, but obvious to the reader.
Yeah,
which I find it interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated that like there's writers that do that, or how they even keep track of their own characters. I'm like, I just imagine are they like a private investigator where they have like the strings on the wall and they're like trying to keep track of the characters and like, how do I bring this person back up? I mean, like I said, I have only read a few of his things. I read a lot of his novellas. I've read Carrie. I can't recall off the top of my head, but my husband Paul, are sometimes co-host. He's a big fan of them, and he's stated the same thing before, that Stephen King does reutilizes characters in different manners. And I think like even Holly, I think, is the big new one everybody's talking about, where she's the detective from other ones. So I'm like, great, I want to read that, but now I got to go back and read all these other ones. That's another podcast episode.
Yes, because that's a sequel to 3 other books that are absolutely amazing. And you'll see like the first 3 books were written, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago was the last one. Mm-hmm. And then he released Holly, which is a sequel to all of this. And he constantly, obviously it's a sequel, so he does talk about the other ones, but it's written very far back. But again, there's these really poignant pieces of information in the first 3 books that you don't remember on the daily, right, on the reg, but when you read the book, you're like, oh, this is so profound and important to this piece, this page, really,
Yeah.
Great book. Highly recommend.
Cool. I'm gonna I'll add that to my never-ending TBR to be read list, because one day I'll finish those before I die.
My Audible list
I might need you to somehow send me them through the whatever phone we have at the time. Pull Mr. Harrigan, who, if you're still around.
Oh yes,
those books.
Yes.
I'll send them to the grave.
So do we write like CCC on there when we want to get him to stop? We'll talk more about that in a little bit.
The CCC, yeah. So Donald Sutherland played Mr. Harrigan, and I really like him. He's a good actor. Did you like his performance?
I loved it. I thought it was spot on. And this was one of the very first times that I've watched the movie before the book. And, of course I could easily see DS as him in the book when I was reading. I was constantly like letting my imagination flow, but I just kind of saw Donald Sutherland. He was great. Definitely.
Yeah. Rest in peace.
Yeah, exactly.
We just recently lost him.
Yeah, which is also kind of important and powerful when you think about it, in the movie.
Yeah, and it's crazy because we picked the topic, and then like a few weeks later he passed away. And,
I was like, dun dun dun.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Harrigan heard us.
He heard us. Maybe he's a fan of my podcast.
Maybe he is. He's all subscribe, check for that.
There you go. Yeah, I need to listen. Share it with your friends. Give us a 5-star rating. All that stuff I should be telling the listeners to do. Maybe Mr. Harrigan can run my social media for me.
I actually wondered.
Thank you, Donald Sutherland. I appreciate all the likes.
Shout out. I often wonder, because a lot of times I've read, because Stephen King does a lot of author's notes, and he also does that in audibles too. And he does, the interesting about Stephen King, he actually reads a lot of the audibles. So you're listening to him, which is super cool. But in almost all of his author's notes, he does talk about the reflection of the cast in his book, because a lot of times he has a lot of influence on the cast. So I wondered, I thought this was who he imagined when he wrote the book.
Yeah.
And I could see that. And again, I think he had a lot of handle in picking Craig as well. He saw the kid from It and probably knew a little bit about, maybe some other movies he's been in. So.
Yeah. I mean, because I initially, I watched the movie, and then when we decided we were going to cover both, I had never technically read the book. So I read the book and I listened to the Audible because, trying to get as many ways to take it in. And Will Patton did the voice, which I think he's from Gone in 60 Seconds and a few. He's a big actor. You guys can Google him.
Yeah.
I thought he did really good in the book, but I was like, man, I really would have loved Donald Sutherland. And I hate that I did that, because still shout out to Will Patton. I still think he did a good job on the Audible.
With you. Yeah, because I don't know if you've ever had the experience of reading, you're one of your favorite authors and it just being a little deadpan, maybe a little drab, and you're like, hey, would this be really good if now that audibles have been kind of integrated in my life, it's hard for me to focus on a book and then refocus on the day. So whereas audibles is kind of naturally what I'm doing during the day. So it's like, kind of it's kind of like autopilot when you're driving. You're listening to an audible, and all of a sudden 10 minutes later you're like, this sucks. This fucking guy that's reading it is just boring. It's a bummer. So in this case, yes, I thought it was amazing. So
yeah, that's definitely happened to me, where you find something and you're really excited to read the book, and then you're like, I can't get into the narrator. And really at a season in my life where I'm having to do a lot of audio versions. I also thought about what you said with how Stephen King does a lot of the end notes. He does cameos in like all of his movies.
Yep.
Whether
he's got a Stan Lee going on
or a bad adaptation.
And he always picks like just like Stan Lee. I think he's been a bus driver. I think that was on It. He always makes sure.
I loved him in Creepshow though. My favorite was if you ever seen the original Creepshow.
Oh yeah.
Where he's like the guy with all the stuff on him, and then even in Creepshow 2, I love him too, where he's like, oh, the guy got cream. What do you think happened? Like,
yeah.
And with the thanks for the ride lady whole thing. Man. That's one of the campiest adaptations. I mean, there's definitely some good ones and bad ones. Like Maximum Overdrive, I like it, even though it's probably not the greatest one.
I love it.
Whereas better ones like Shawshank and Green Mile and the Pet Cemeteries.
Yeah. And I think, Creepshow is really important because that's a screenplay. So that's one of maybe a handful of things. Like I think the other one is Silver Bullet. And there's another one called, Cycle of the Werewolf, I think. So he actually intentionally wrote that to put those into the big screen. Whereas like The Shining, he didn't. Stanley Kubrick read it and called him and said, we're doing this, and each of these things are very, very different, but the screenplay reflects, Creepshow, for instance, very, very well, obviously, because it's mostly dialect. And where The Shining, it's the dynamic duo of Kubrick and Stephen King. And, a lot of that is obviously directorship in that movie that really brings everything to light. So, I mean, they captured so much in that movie. I just can't believe it. I mean,
that's another good adaptation, which I definitely, for sure, I think you're on the right track with saying Kubrick had a major influence on it. Same with Creepshow. I'm sure Romero directing and Savini doing the makeup and the other things. Special effects had
one of his early ones, right? So it's good. It's amazing.
I think even Greg Nicotero was like he was doing like an internship with Savini at the time. So there's so many names in the background on that one. But yeah, definitely those are like my favorite cameos.
Great. It was great. Yeah.
King. So thinking back to the movie, so Craig and Mr. Harrigan, when you first read it, did you get like, I know I did, or not even just when I read it, I think when I saw the movie too, did you get like a creepy vibe at first? Like old man, like why is this old dude hiring? Like you start thinking like stranger danger for Craig, but but it turns around, right? Did you get those vibes initially?
Oh, 100%. So I don't know if any of the listeners has seen Apt Pupil, but at the very beginning, no spoiler alert here, but at the beginning, yes. But it's about a movie where it's a coming of age type of movie where there's a boy and an older guy, and they have a relationship, they're friends, and it just gets really weird. He's a Nazi. He starts kind of influencing the kid in Nazi behavior, and it gets really weird really fast. So I 100% thought that's where we were going with this. I mean, definitely stranger danger, warning flags, red flags. I was screaming at Craig through the TV like, no, he hasn't seen Apt Pupil, and especially because the two actors, and Donald Sutherland and the actor in Apt Pupil, Ian, are very, very, I think, very close to my heart, and also very similar as far as acting prestige and how much I love both of them. So it was definitely even creepier because I respect them so much, especially Donald Sutherland, right? And, I mean, the guy can play everything. So I thought it was really interesting, though, how the story unraveled because he wasn't
it takes a turn. It's not that way, right?
As an evil person, yet there's these horrifying acts that we see later. And you kind of have a sense of, how did this happen? Why would this old man who seems wholesome, you know, who has Craig's
Yeah.
respect, and trust. And trust. That's the most important part, right?
Yeah, they both end
Craig
up trusting
really,
each other very
yeah.
much.
And so as the reader, you're trusting Harrigan now, you know, and it's
Yeah.
like, can he really do this? Can this really happen? So
Yeah, I
I
mean, you don't
we start
expect it
getting
from
this.
from King, right? You don't expect that
Yeah,
from Stephen King because he does. I mean, he does have like again some of the more not just straight horror stuff, but you didn't. Most of his stuff it's just straight up horror. So I was
yeah,
already expecting something to be completely off between them, and then I really like that you saw this connection between them. And, you know, these different generation, them teaching each other in different ways, and being like a not a father figure or a grandpa figure even, but just this adult figure in his life that had a positive influence, but yet the horrifying aspect is that we're wondering, like, was he, you know, helping him kill people from the grave, and was that a bad thing? Was that a good thing?
sure, sure. And the generational, you know, influences on each other is very interesting too, because you always think, you know, respect my elders, etc. But this whole thing actually started with Craig influenced Mr. Harrigan, you know, and showing him and teaching him and showing him a whole different world. And then you see the opinions of Donald Sutherland, which, you know, of Mr. Harrigan, which we can relate to, right? Which is reflected in social, the social atmosphere and the whole entire world, right? Not just in our
Yeah,
small circles, you know, and, you know, how we use the phone, etc. I didn't know if you
yeah,
wanted to dive down that path right now.
yeah. I think that
Yeah.
that's a great dive to take. Is that, you know, it it's the horrifying aspect of this that, you know, when he gives Mr. Harrigan this cell phone, Mr. Harrigan is telling him, like, you know, I don't have a radio because then I'd listen to it, and I don't have a TV because then I'd watch it, and you know, he gets him addicted really quick to his phone. He
Yeah.
even makes like an analogy, I think, between like heroin and drug dealers. And then he starts
Hmm.
talking about like, why are they giving the information for free? And he brings up some really good points about how, you know, not just things, you know, silly things that annoy us, you know, because we want all our fun with, you know, with pay, we have to pay for things
Sure.
now with paywalls, but he brings up things about information sharing and what's going to happen when other people, when information that's not supposed to be shared is put out there. And
Yeah,
that's
I
where it
mean,
gets scary.
yeah, and I mean, I marked down one of my favorite quotes in the book is, you know, this is a gateway drug. And I can't tell you how poignant that statement was, how powerful that is for the, you know, because it immediately when I read that, I had a flashback of, you know, around 2020 when this book was kind of written, you know, what I used it for. I used it for political stuff. I mean, I'm a scientist, so you can imagine in 2020 what I was using it for. Now, fast
Yeah.
forward to now, I have definitely learned from those behaviors because here we are again in 2024, right? 4 years later.
Yeah. Crazy
So
climate. Yeah.
yeah, so I've since developed a lead. I'm a lead in a hiking club for like socially awkward people, and now that's what I use my phone for, is to help them, show them, hey, here are the trails. Here's what you need for the trails. And I get everybody out into this giant chat. I mean, there's like 4,000 people who are all socially awkward. It is hard to get them out. It's hard to get
Yeah.
them on the trail. So I immediately kind of identified at the beginning when he said this. And I thought it was really crazy because, again, as Stephen King's one of his predictions that he used through Mr. Harrigan in making these statements. And I'm 100% guilty of that, you know, because
Yeah.
in the
Me
book,
too.
he's getting like a, you know, iPhone 1 or something. It's one of the first ones ever
Yeah. Yeah.
made,
Really, the
you
first
know.
model.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, and I know we've all seen this. You know, you pointed out the, you know, kind of algorithms in advertising, etc. And it's so true. I had, you know, my husband sent me tickets to somewhere, and he had already bought them. And the next thing I know, I'm seeing this on my social media ads for this,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't even come from me. And you know, it's very, very scary. And for Mr. Harrigan being, you know, 80 years old, never seen anything like this, he understood it as soon as he
Mm-hmm.
saw what it was capable of.
Yeah.
But
He
he
figured
also
it out
saw
right
benefit.
away.
Yeah, yeah,
He
and then it
figured out.
benefited him right away. And he said, "Oh, wait a minute, I love
Yeah.
it."
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Yeah.
But
And
he understood. He understood the power. You know, that was the horror, right? Was the phone. You know that.
yeah.
You know
That
that.
that people we become addicted. I mean, we are, like you said. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. We use our phones for everything, and you try to do your best to not just be completely, engulfed in using your phone, but it's kind of a way, you kind of don't have a choice either. Now there's a reason why you have to. I mean, you have to use it to pay your bills and all that, but you're not only using it to pay your bills and do other things. I mean, if there were no cell phones, there definitely wouldn't be this podcast. And
Yeah. I mean,
that it's
unfortunately,
just scary that you worry about your person, not just personal. There's days I'm like, who wants Alyse's information? But I'm like, well, who wants, like, government secrets and vice versa? Not to get political on here or
sure,
go too
sure.
deep into that about people's beliefs with conspiracy theories, anything of that nature. But it's definitely he's not just talking about phones, he's talking about
Yeah,
the internet in
yeah.
general, right? How it can be used, it can be used in great ways, like your group that you're talking about, where you're bringing people together to have a social outlet with each other.
Yeah,
and
and I
you
mean,
can use it in a negative way,
yeah, and
to
I remember
put
you told
people
me a
down based
story.
on their looks and in their beliefs.
Right, right. I mean, it can be used for hate, and I remember a story that you told me about where you were, I think you were working with kids or something. I can't really remember, but somebody says, you say, hey, the earth is round, and somebody raises their hand and says, hey, look, it says the earth is flat, so it must be true because that's what Google said.
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
have this generation now, and I know Harrigan actually, he touches on it, but he doesn't get into it too much. Like, how can we understand and distinguish between real and fake, and that's when a new generation, how do you they're not going to listen
Yeah.
to their parents and stuff, and like that's something that we have to take into consideration with our kiddos, and the
And it's
next
hard to
generation.
do.
It is hard to do. We have to be
You
very
try to
cognizant,
preach to
right?
them, but
We have to be
yeah,
very
you're right. I didn't
cognizant,
listen to my
right?
parents, so why would anybody listen to me?
Here we are,
Yeah, and especially now, because like you said, I mean, all the people, most people now, I mean, we're aging ourselves. I mean, we were around during phones, the beginning of cell phones. We had
We had
pagers.
chirpies.
We were lucky
We
if we
had
had.
chirpies
Yeah,
too.
that's right. We had the chirps, chirp chirp at work. Yeah, I forgot about that.
But yes,
But
we did start off with pagers and putting
yeah,
boobless with the numbers.
yeah, that's
Yes.
right. Oh yeah, that there was
Phones.
no emojis yet. There was no,
Isn't
you
that
couldn't
weird
do that.
times where we would be driving and we'd get a message on our pager and we'd have to pull over and go to payphone?
A
I would not get out of
payphone.
my car anymore in this day and age for anything in some deserted lot, in a strip joint. Like, oh, there, in the middle of the day, there's a payphone for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I just wouldn't do that now.
Yeah,
It's just the
because
whole
you
thing.
can't
It's
even
just
find a payphone unless you're maybe. I mean, even then, sometimes I'm driving places, when I'm driving far, and I'm like, there's not even those call boxes here. What the heck?
I know.
Yeah, but Mr. Harrigan was on it,
Yeah, yeah.
predicting that, and yeah, that's definitely scary. So, do you think that there was a connection? So going back to so Craig thinks, that he probably caused the death of the two different people in the movie. And do you think that there was a connection between Craig and Mr. Harrigan, that you think their connection was supernatural, or do you think there was a more rational explanation for what happened?
So surprisingly, as a scientist, I would weigh, and it's probably because I analyzed the book a little bit. I analyzed the movie a little bit, and I really could see how it could be supernatural. I mean, that's the fun part of life for me, and not every scientist is like this, but Albert Einstein was. He believes in all kinds of entities. He said, if it's not for that, then who gives us our morals and values? I mean, it's inert in us, right?
Yeah.
So just for the battle of good and evil, which is, this is where this is alluding to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the battle of good and evil, there is supernatural, right? Like the gods are the ones that tell us what's good and bad, correct? I mean, obviously that's where everything comes from on a religion standpoint. And even if you don't have a particular religion, you still understand the difference between good and evil based on those models, right?
Yeah,
So
and whether you want to believe it or not, unfortunately, those models, I mean, not unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, those models are a part of, they're instilled in life all the time,
yeah,
whether you're
it's
somebody that
written on
goes
the
to church
dollar,
or not.
baby,
It's all over the place. Yeah, it's on yeah, it's
yeah,
everywhere. And
yeah.
people around you have been groomed to use that information,
Correct.
whether
Correct.
you want to use it or not. So like you said, it doesn't matter whether you're religious or not. Those
Yeah.
values do dictate a lot what goes on in society.
Yeah, but when I thought, like, what else could be, even though that's what I believe and that's how I feel, especially because it's a little fun to feel that, to see that, and hey, what could happen. And now, of course, now I do look at my phone a little differently. And don't you get weird texts from people that you don't even know? Hey, how you doing? And you're like, who the fuck is that? You know,
It's a
Billy,
spammer.
I'm scared. You're immediately scared though, right? Like, oh shit, they found me. Like you're always.
Oh, what have you been doing,
failed for
Ruby, that
some
they
reason.
found you?
Which is super. Who knows? They found me out for sure. Which is weird because social media, we're very, very visible. But when I first thought about it, you know, when I was watching it, because I'm always like, well, what else could it be? You know, and I couldn't explain to you why at the very beginning. Fight Club popped into my head immediately, and so that's what I analyzed a little bit. I'm like, why the hell would I think of that? Oh, my little Southern accent just came out, but anyway, so I thought dual personalities, you know, and you know, when I went back to I watched the movie first, and that's where I kind of thought about. So I went to when I read the book, I was kind of, you know, in the back of my mind, kind of subconsciously, kind of thinking about that, and I could find nothing that could disprove nor prove the double personality perspective. But again, at the end of the day, there was a few things, like, for instance, he's, you know, on the grave and he hears the sound of the phone, you know, for instance, the song,
Stand by your man. Yeah, I sing on this podcast, y'all, just like in our last episode, but I'm terrible at it. Anyway, Tammy, why didn't?
Oh, me too.
If only I could sing that good.
And I thought these were very good tools to use to make the reader or the watcher, like a moper, not a moper.
Mopery. Oh God, we're bringing in Revenge of the Nerds, guys. If you ever watch that movie, go find out what mopery is.
Google mopery for sure.
Google mopery, Revenge of the Nerds. You'll get a great laugh. Anyway,
if you're participate in mopery, if you're the mopee, I mean, I don't know. But yeah, definitely you'd see something like that. So
yeah, I didn't think about that. That's a good theory. I hadn't thought about that. I did try to figure it out. I mean, I'm not a full-on scientist. I am somebody who does try to you know, look at facts and sort through things. And like you said, if we don't look too much into it either, though, because why are we reading this sort of genre if you try to figure everything out? I mean, then you have to throw out vampires and werewolves and all that. I mean, you have to have some fun in it.
And I think to your point, that's probably why I had the, you know, the bad dreams in the first place, because some part of me, which maybe I can't really explain, you know, is like, what if, you know?
Yeah.
And
There's always that what if. Yeah. But I like that you said, like, you couldn't disprove or prove, and I felt the same way with like the supernatural thing, and I tend to be that way with certain things. I'm like, well, I can't prove or disprove something, so maybe it's real, maybe it's not. I mean, I kind of first kind of chopped it up to like it was just a coincidence, and then I thought maybe, you know, and this is something I started thinking, like, maybe Craig felt really bad that these two people died, and he kind of wished upon them dying, that he just equated it to Mr. Harrigan, so he could kind of take some of the blame off of himself too. I mean, maybe that's just
like
the way his mind is working.
Like it was
like maybe it was coincidental, but he also felt bad, so then in his mind he made it like, oh well, it must be Mr. Harrigan from the grave.
Correct.
This for me.
But it's kind of like his internal struggle, you know, with the right of good and evil. And that's where he kind of was like, what if, just like we were talking about, you know, and he said, well, what if, then I'm getting rid of this fucking phone. And you know, it does take him, you know, again, coming of age and, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a fucking phone now, just FYI.
it's just a phone. Yeah.
I'm not mad at it. Now that it's created murder, I'm mad at it.
I'm mad at it. I don't want to. But I mean, he even, and then he makes the same argument we made about, like, he's like, well, maybe I won't get a phone at all. Then he's like, well, I kind of need a phone to function. So he throws like that actual phone that he has to use.
And that's why, you know, we
get a hold of Mr. Harrigan.
Yeah, and this is where we get into the, you know, did they deserve to die? You know, whether it was Mr. Harrigan or not.
Oh, I don't. Right? Yeah.
You know, as a, you know, philanthropist and humanitarian, as a, you know, scientist, my job is to save people. And don't get me wrong, I understand, you know, overpopulation and climate change very much. But you know, my take on some of these things is it's situational, right? Like, for instance, I felt that the second one was more deserved than the other one. And let me tell you, moral values out the window right now, because I know what I'm saying is probably, you know, extremely controversial, but for me, I think, you know, a like for a like, why not, in this case. So I really felt like, yeah, that's right. You know, how could you do that for the second one? which wasn't even as even though the first one could have been more like a suicide attempt, right? Quote.
Yeah,
I
quote
still
unquote.
felt like didn't deserve it as much as the second one.
Yeah.
There's certain choices and each one were different but the same. For instance, it was their own choice, right? For both of the people. And then you're like, there was only two. That's also
That's
very,
a whole other
why
thing.
did
Like,
Stephen King? I
yeah.
know, why did Stephen King do that? Because in all of his books, I mean, it starts off with like some books, 17 people, getting mass murdered, and you're just like, fuck, at the very beginning, where now you're dealing. He makes you think about each individual one because there's only two,
Yeah,
and
you have to focus on them more, and then it makes it more easy to think maybe it is coincidental. But then I remember thinking back to and I don't remember if it's in the book, but I think it's in the movie, and I don't know if he uses the same exact words in the book, but he tells them something about like, making enemies, and he makes Craig promise him. He's like, hey, you're gonna cross paths with enemies, like, and he's like, don't hesitate to dispatch them. He's like, dispatch them with haste. And you
yeah,
know what? You shouldn't feel any iota of guilt for doing so. And it's kind of like and I remember I was like, is that foreshadowing? Like,
definitely,
him letting him know, like,
definitely,
hey, people are gonna like F with you later, and like, don't let him do that. And it's
yeah,
almost like, well, these people messed with Craig, so Mr. Harrigan, he told Mr. Harrigan with the second death, like he was like, I want him dead. Like the first one, he didn't come out and like straight up say it. The second one, he requested to Mr. Harrigan, like, I want him dead. He killed my favorite
right,
teacher. Like she was
right.
a good person, and she didn't deserve it, and he was a drunk, and again, all the reasons why I think his death was a little more what's the
Deserving.
deserving?
It's
Yeah,
hard. It's hard.
again,
It's hard to
it's
say it,
hard to
right?
get that off my tongue
Yes.
because I might
Yeah.
piss some people off, but it's the truth. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that the first guy was a total jerk too. I mean,
Maybe.
kind of make him
Maybe.
like hazing
Easier
him,
to.
but
Maybe
easier to
easier to
understand.
justify. Easier to because that's how
Teenagers are
Craig
bad.
validates himself.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's how
yeah.
Craig validates his own actions is by going back and thinking about what he said, what Mr. Harrigan had told him, and he uses that and it's kind of a dismissal, but then by the time the second one hits, because it was so personal, I think, and because it was such a over a long period of time that he knew his teacher, it was a lot more personal, it was a lot deeper, I think, and it was also kind of a validation of the first time around, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's
It's
like,
just
hey, what is the saying? Fool me once and fool me twice. It's kind of like that where, oh, hey, it happened twice. Let me not go there on the third one. And
yeah, yeah.
questions come for the audience, right? Hey, wait a minute.
That's at the point where Craig I think it's like the point of no return, like he did it and then he has to decide, like, am I going to continue, like I think maybe Craig didn't even trust himself, like what if in the future somebody does do something again where I have this want of this person that I mean we all make jokes about, I mean, okay, maybe not everybody, but people make jokes about things, or you think thoughts
Yeah,
and you might regret those thoughts later. It takes reflection to change your mind on certain
definitely.
things, but I'm sure he was like, hey, what if I have this sort of situation again? I don't want to be tempted to hit up Mr. Harrigan to take this
Yeah,
person out. So
and
I'm just going to
I
get rid of the phone.
Yeah, and yeah, and exactly to that point. I mean, as an adult, would really do that. And I think it's very, I have to give Craig credit to actually he thought about this. He was in emotional turmoil. I was almost like Catcher in the Rye. Oh no, Crime and Punishment. It was almost like Crime and Punishment, where his internal reflections kind of drove him to isolation and this phone and everything, and which at the end of the day he ended up trying to get another phone and trying to understand more and interpersonal. I mean, that's really hard to drag along with you. It's kind of like a ball and chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about spouses here, but something that will drag you down and drown you,
Find ways to deal with it. Yeah,
and
for
then
sure.
and I
And he was
think
only in like his 20s when he decided to throw the phone. I mean, I
right,
think, right? I mean, he could have, at
yes,
least he
because
seemed, he
yeah,
could have,
it's like
yeah.
said a few years later after high school when he went back,
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm. He was still quite young, and seeing his maturity and understanding, hey, this could be, because he believed, right, because of his
Yeah, he
trust with
definitely
Mr.
believed, I
Harrigan.
believe.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's hard to, there's a lot of things here that, again, they use tools and, which made us further believe. So it's like, and you identify with Craig automatically a lot of times and say, yes, get rid of that phone. Oh, I'm glad he tried this. So you're able to kind of put your trust in Craig a little bit too. And he did, eventually make the correct morally correct decision, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you definitely I find myself at times where I was like wanting him, like, yeah, I think that's totally justified what you did. And then there's other times I'm like, oh, I don't know though.
Because think about it. He can't turn himself in. What's he going to say?
Yeah, exactly. He's going to be crazy. Like, it's my phone. Yeah.
He's a total out. I mean, he was riding in the gray area at 85.5 and never got 86 because it was routed this way,
Yeah, there was no way that, like, a detective wasn't going to show up at his door and be like, hey, so I heard about this phone business where you're using it to take out people.
Can I borrow that? Like, how do you do that?
And then he'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm too old. I don't even listen. Who's Tammy Wynette?
Craig, I got a list, okay? Checking it twice. I want to use it. I'll be Santa right now.
So you said something about the letter. I never figured that out. I know the book, and I tried to catch it again in the movie and in the book. Like, what did you know? Is there any significance to somebody who reads more Stephen King than I've read with the letters that he was using to what Mr. Harrigan was using to reach back out to Craig?
So one thing I do know is so Stephen King. So this was an odd duck for one reason that I picked up anyway. So Stephen King uses K a lot, like Quartet in the Dark Tower series. And that's a huge. So that's kind of a internal mind relationship between people. Quartet. So we're together now. We're vibing mentally, not really saying anything. So those C's were pronounced as K's actually, but there is a and I can't remember exact. I know how to pronounce it. It does start with a C, but in a different language, this word that starts with a C means stop. However, on the whole other side of things, it's also what Craig starts with, right? And it's also kind of
that's what I figured it had something to do with.
Yeah,
that was the only letter I could make sense, though.
Yeah, so me personally, I agree with you. I think it just is Craig, and then there's an X. Stop. Now I will say,
I thought maybe kill. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
X marks the spot. I don't know.
Well, if it was 3 X's, I would know what that meant,
Yeah.
But there was only, it's like, can we use 3 X's here?
I'm sure there's some like online theories if we go on there. I'm sure there's like a Reddit. Like, we could probably do a Reddit deep dive on that. Down a rabbit hole for that, but I didn't know if you just do anything off the top of your head.
Yeah, in either case, it's pretty interesting. Like he was calling, for Craig, which I like that personally a little bit better. It's more influential, and I think it's more personal, rather than some other language like Mr. Harrigan's texting you one letter from another language. Super weird to me, but
yeah, I mean, Mr. Harrigan was a man of few words. I mean, I always cracked up on he used like that same message. I'll call you back if it seems appropriate. I was like, so maybe that was just his way of like, keeping it simple for him. He was a kind of straightforward person.
For that shit. He's like, I'm already a billionaire. I'm not wasting my time,
Yeah.
Shit. But yeah, I love that. Definitely showcased, he was a very, I don't want to really use the word vanilla because, it turns out he's not so vanilla, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of depth to him that is actually created for something that is a little, hey, this old guy is a billionaire, and they're friends, and then turns out, at the end. So yeah, definitely.
I mean, he was a good billionaire to him, though. I think that was another thing. Thinking about what we touched on earlier with the generational gap between them, that it turned out, he did do right by Craig. He hooked him up. I also wondered, was Mr. Harrigan supernatural in some way or did he just know, hey, I'm getting old, I need to do this? Because it was only about like 2 months before he passed away that he goes to his lawyer and he decides, hey, I want to set Craig up with, this trust and this money, and make sure that he's successful in life, even though he didn't even like Craig's choice in like a career. He's like, oh, you want to go to Hollywood?
Sure.
He gives him his little spill on that, but he's like, that's what you want to do. He wanted to make sure he was hooked up on that. So it was really cool.
Yeah, and it brought me to think about, the influences that people have or that people don't. And I mean, I've lived, I don't want to age myself, but I've lived a little bit, probably maybe 3 lives by now. But I can definitely attest that people are put in my path for a certain reason. 100%. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. I have probably been in some, maybe, I don't know if I want to say divine, but interventions that I can't explain for sure, why I'm here today. And maybe that was, what Mr. Harrigan was to Craig, and again, he powerfully influenced him. I mean, he had to deal with good and evil at a very young age, and then internally, he didn't tell, again, he didn't call
he couldn't go to his therapist and talk about this, or his or his roomie or anybody, to chat about what was going on.
I mean, I would have called you for sure, roomie, like with
yeah,
for shit.
Sure.
Like, we would have been digging graves for sure, but Craig didn't do that, right? Again, he was kind of isolated in both the book and the movie, which I thought was really important, because again, then you can understand why he didn't. And again, he was more isolated with the phone later, but overall, he was kind of a little nerd, in a way.
Yeah, I mean,
nerds are cool too. Nerds are cool.
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm a total nerd myself. I mean, got my nerdiness to me.
Yes,
I think that was what was made their relationship so good too, was that it started out like, oh, he's a good reader for his age, and
right,
he picked him for all these odd reasons, and in the end, they became more than, I mean, you never hear them say like, oh, I love you or anything, but you could feel like the love there, and it wasn't in this inappropriate way. Like, the word love wasn't needed, but it also makes you wonder, like, you knew clearly Mr. H he cared about Craig fondly for, setting up with this trust. And again, that's where you start to want to bring in the supernatural aspect. Did he care about him enough and know, like, he knew the character of Craig, that Craig was going to have people continue to mess with him, that he was like, hey, I got your back in the future. I mean, the words, the ringtone was stand by your man. I mean, he was like, look, I'm going to stand by you, Craig. You're my man. You're my homie. Like, I got your back if somebody messes with you. So I thought that was really cool that he picked that song.
Me too.
I mean, and I love hearing it. I mean, I like Tammy Wynette too, so that hurt.
I thought it was great. That was a great tool to use, and that just reeled me in like bait on a hook. I was just like, yeah, that's it. I was super excited. Yeah, I think that we're missing a little bit, when we compare the movie to the book, we're missing a little bit of character development, I think, with Mr. Harrigan. Like, maybe a really cool, like, flashback scene, because, again, it's a short story and it's kind of a short movie when you compare it to other Stephen King movies. So maybe just a flashback scene to bring a little bit more depth, understanding to who Mr. Harrigan is. There's a tiny bit, right? It definitely is not as in depth as the book is. So I think that would definitely add some color and give the audience a little bit more rationale to any behaviors or any relationship building that Craig and Harrigan have. It can also kind of put some more depth into the generational gap between the two. I know there's obviously tons, but understand a little bit more of what he went through during his time. And we all know, as readers and as the audience, what Craig is going through, because we were here in 2020. Obviously, we're not 4. So, but I think that would be a good addition.
That was a good point, because
it would be quick too.
Yeah, because in the book he does more for him. He doesn't just read, right? I mean, he does his watering of his plants. They even have a few scenes where they're like driving together, and he goes and does his, like, Mr. Harrigan stays in the car and he does his grocery shopping. And they talk about like his physical struggles and why he has an elevator. Yeah, that's right. I definitely found myself more understanding Mr. Harrigan more in the book than in the movie. I think they did really good with giving us a lot of background on Craig. They did use of flashbacks with, like, his mom.
Correct. Yeah.
But they didn't do as much with Mr. Harrigan. He was a little more, I guess, blunt is the word I'm looking. I'm sure there's a better word. He was a little more blunt in the movie than he was in the book. You understood his character a little bit more because they had more time for character development.
Correct. And how the relationship developed with the two
and the
losses, right?
The relationship development as well. There was definitely more things that the book covered in that sense, and it would have been good for the movie, but the adaptations are never going to be So I think that covers everything, Rumi. I really appreciate
Yeah.
having you on the podcast today.
Yeah, it was a
Talking
blast.
to us
Thank you for
about some
having me.
Stephen King and Mr. Harrigan. We'll probably have to bring you back on for some other Stephen King.
Let's do
I won't
it.
make you do. I won't make you talk about Amityville Horror because I know you. I
Yeah.
know you don't like that little horror.
That little whore needs to stay on her corner.
Yeah, she needs to stay away. But so we appreciate having you on and bringing all of your insight. And for the listeners, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed what you listened to, please go on our website, dreadfuldialogue.com. We have blogs, we have other information related to the genre. If you want to follow us on Instagram, you can check us out at Dreadful Dialogue Podcast. And thank you guys for listening. Until next time, have a good one.
Bye.
Ready to elevate your business? PM Digital Web Design creates stunning, user-friendly websites tailored just for your small business. Whether you need a simple landing page, a website redesign, or an e-commerce store, PM Digital Web Design can make it work for you. Book your free consultation today at pmdigital.casaslh.com. Let's build something amazing.